Yeah, I'm going to invite Farzana to come up on stage and invite Arun Sudhaman to have a conversation with Shayoni and Farzana. Arun is the CEO and editor-in-chief. We will get the mic to you. Arun is the CEO and editor-in-chief of PRovoke Media. Thank you, Arun.
Can you hear me okay? Is my mic working? Okay, excellent. Thank you both. Vanakkam, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be back on home soil at PRAXIS, 10 years after Pondicherry. And on behalf of PRAXIS, I'm very happy to welcome the first ever speaker from Pakistan in Farzana. So, welcome. So plenty of food for thought in both your presentations in terms of horizon scanning, predictive analytics, behavioral science, and of course misinformation and disinformation. I want to start here. I think one of you mentioned the phrase that change is hard, but change is also a constant, as I think we're all aware. And we talk a lot about behavioral change. In terms of end users, in terms of consumers or other stakeholders. But what about behavioral change in terms of your clients, in terms of companies and brands? Because this kind of stuff can be intimidating for them to take on board. What are the barriers to getting companies to think through the kind of lens that you're both advising? So Shay, I'll start with you, please.
Okay, can you hear me? Perfect. Thank you. So you're right, change is hard, and adopting a very different methodology, such as behavioral science, can be difficult. But what I'd reinforce is it's a methodology, it's a frame of mind. It's a toolkit that can be used for multiple different scenarios, projects, opportunities, etc. And I think when it comes to barriers, the biggest barrier is capability, right? As an industry, our knowledge within the behavioral sciences is very low, even though our only job as communicators is to speak to human beings and convince them to do something. I mean, that's behavioral science 101. And yet we don't have the scientific methodology and knowledge to adopt that into practice. So I think as communicators, a lot of what we do does deploy behavioral science mechanisms, but it's done so intuitively. And when you do that, you're unable to measure the impact of that approach. So it's sort of like stabbing in the dark. Adopting a capability-based approach to this type of problem solving will help in much more effective outcomes. So clients come to Lynn, they do know what Lynn offers, they do know our proposition, so they are already part persuaded, and of course we'll have to pitch and convince them, but they have that already in their minds. But I appreciate that can be challenging, but I'd say there's a wealth of literature online, a wealth of resources online to start upskilling, but it does start with capability building.
Okay. Farzana?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question, the sort of client-agency dynamic. What I tend to do is, again, it starts with empathy, so really understanding your client. They're going to be grappling with all sorts of issues, politics, internally, and so forth. And so what I do is some aspects of PR, behavioral science, horizon scanning can be quite complex. And if you think about someone and they've got a busy day and a busy home life, you just don't want to add to their burden. So what I would typically do is to try and give them a little snack to start with. So you don't just give them this 5-course meal of behavioral science when they're mentally burnt out. You give them a little snack, a little nugget to try and pique their sort of curiosity. So often I try and work really hard to try and condense sort of complex concepts into little snacks for people to digest quickly and to pique curiosity. So, is awful when you're confronted with like a 50-page deck with a column of text just that's so oppressive that it depresses you. So so what I try and do is create a little one-pager, but make it super relevant to the issues. And also, when you actively listen to your client, you'll start picking up actually what's important to them and embed that in the way that you present this back to them as a tool that can help them with the specific challenge that they're facing. So I would say it starts with really active listening, really understanding your client, having empathy to understand that they are busy, they don't have the headspace, and working that extra hour to condense what you're trying to communicate into a little snackable, digestible piece of content for them.
So active listening and empathy building. So great advice from both of you. Let's delve a little bit deeper. I think for many people in this room, they're probably so actively occupied with whatever the events of the day might be, whatever the latest crisis might be. So there's a certain amount of mind space, I think, required to take on some of these things. But what about from a investment and time perspective? Because sometimes there's a perception that taking on these kinds of techniques and frameworks can be expensive and time-consuming and requires more resources. And as we know, communications is always generously resourced within organizations. How do you address those challenges?
I think there is that perception, right, that this is going to be expensive, and it's not a cheap solution. Of course it's not. It wouldn't be. It does require high levels of talent within a business, whether that's in-house or agency side, to deliver it. It needs people with authenticity who are scientists. I'm not, very clearly. I'm an applied practitioner. But the results will be tenfold. So thinking about the investment you put into any project, what is the outcome you want from it? What behavioral science will do, or misinformation strategy will do, is stop you having to spend more money in the future. And that is the approach to demonstrate to clients, is that investment in getting the diagnosis right, getting the solution right, will stop you from having problems in the future. So get it right now instead of having to spend more money to fix it later.
Okay, great.
I guess what I tend to do in terms of the horizon scanning is move away from a them and us sort of mentality into let's go on this journey together. The internal perspective and the external perspective together is incredibly critical in order to imagine what tomorrow could be. And I think, when you sort of position it like that, then it becomes much more engaging and more collaborative. In terms of budgets, when I first started trying this out on clients, I started giving it initially like a little sort of snack report when I do sort of quarterly reviews on our client work, just to our long-term clients who've been with us multiple years, just to start to build in the in your sort of quarterly plans and reviews, to start building in a little bit of behavioral science. Again, just kind of like whetting their appetite, and then over time they become more and more interested and then buy into it more. But often another area to do is to actually be very generous with your knowledge and your insight. Have a breakfast briefing, invite clients, people who aren't clients, bring in experts in order to really share knowledge. Because I think if you go to clients with a very transactional response, then the trust, isn't going to be there, and trust is the ultimate currency in building positive work between clients and agencies. So, be generous with your knowledge and your insight, and your enthusiasm itself, should be contagious.
So this industry, is only as strong as the talent that works for it. But some of the solutions and some of the thinking that you've outlined would suggest that very different skills are required when you compare it with perhaps some of the traditional services that have driven the growth of the public relations industry over the last 100 years. What skills have you been looking to bring in, have you brought in, and how successful have you been at attracting and retaining those kinds of people?
So I think at Lynn we have a very different workforce than the traditional workforce, and I talked about this last year at the PRovoke Summit in DC, which I recommend attending if you are. So at Lynn, we are not over-indexed in any department, but we do have behavioral scientists, qualitative researchers, quantitative researchers, statisticians, data analysts, to then make sure that's reflected also on the Stratcom side, to have your traditional PR pros, media buyers, media planners, strategists, planners, etc. We also then have the added misinformation strategists coming into the play also to provide that 360, if you will, from creating behaviors to protecting those behaviors from mis and disinfo.
I guess when it comes to talent, we seek the other. We love people from different cultures. People in our team are from South Africa, Argentina, Spain, UK, India, Nigeria. And so, with our team, we're constantly working with people within our team from different cultures, and our clients are from all over the world. So I think we naturally attract people who are culturally curious, who are comfortable working with different cultures, who embrace the other. So we pretty much hire for values. I think in terms of skills, that can be taught. If someone is curious and passionate, I think, the teaching is just a matter of time. It's the values that's the most important for us.
I would add that diversity of thought is so important in coming up with counterintuitive solutions, the not obvious solutions that will get you ahead of your competitors.
Diversity of thought, yeah. Let's switch it a little bit to look at this from the corporate perspective. So organizations that have successfully embedded this kind of thinking in terms of looking ahead for opportunities and threats, and in terms of integrating behavioral science. Do you think they have any particular characteristics in common?
Oh, good question. I think many organizations have, and I think it comes down to being bold, curious, and innovative. So it's about taking a non-traditional approach to what is probably a traditional problem. And Rory Sutherland, which you might know as the guru at Ogilvy, who talks a lot about behavioral science and marketing, he said something that sticks with me, which is that the opposite of a good idea can also be a good idea. And I think the organizations that are brave and open to very different, unique approaches in this very complex world that we now live in are the ones that are going to come out at the front.
So courage and curiosity are important.
And bravery.
And yeah, sure.
I think in addition to those, I'd say humility, because today you could be a market leader, and tomorrow, because things just move so fast, tomorrow you could be forgotten. So having that humility to understand that even if you're the category leader and you're successful today, that could be a temporary position if you're not constantly looking over your shoulder and doing a 360 horizon scan. So having that humility, understanding that whatever success that you have today may not be there for much longer unless you're constantly looking for the new area. And you sometimes see leadership becoming very arrogant with success, but ultimately success is a confluence of factors that are constantly moving, and the environment that we're in is constantly moving. So, I think success today and tomorrow and yesterday is rooted in humility.
So courage, curiosity, and humility, which I think are values to live by. I think we can all agree. So last question on, on these kinds of processes before I want to shift to talking more about misinformation and politics. Shayoni, you said, I think, experimentation. You talked about experimentation a lot in your work, and we saw that in the campaign that was so successful in terms of boosting vaccination. But experimentation requires a willingness to fail, right?
Absolutely.
And we hear so much about that and how it's really important. But how hard is it actually for companies to adopt that kind of mindset?
I think you've absolutely nailed it there, right? So you've got to be okay to be proven wrong. And that's the beauty of a scientific approach. I think it takes away some of that baggage that we bring into this industry. I have absolutely no reservation or hesitation going into a situation where I might have a hypothesis and that hypothesis not working. And indeed, it has been the case where it's not worked. But at least I know that it doesn't work before I activate a whatever campaign. So experimentation is an approach that takes away as much as possible human bias, gives you clear data, And that data hopefully is replicable, so you know that when it goes out into the world, into the wild, that it will work. But yeah, it does take that sort of courage to say, it's all right to be wrong.
I would say, actually, what I find when I work with CEOs, and I've worked with organizations like SpaceX that are very sort of forward-thinking, what I've seen in these organizations is that they are not always just reactive. They are also quite centered. And so what I see is I see a lot of the leadership taking time out, during the year to be centered. Often a lot of successful CEOs that I meet actually end up going on Vipassana, where they go on silent retreats. So I think to be centered is incredibly important in a fast-moving world. And often when you see leadership, if they're constantly reacting to crisis and issues, and they don't take time out to really sit and think about the organization, because how many times everyone in the room, we would all love to be strategic, we'd all love to sort of read research, but we'll often say, well, we don't have the time, we're being pulled in lots of different directions. So having that discipline and having those boundaries and carving that time for headspace, for thinking, for strategic thinking, I think is what really separates the innovators from the followers.
Okay, thank you. So let's talk a little bit about some of the threats that I think you both identified in your presentations. We'll start with mis and disinformation. What would you say are the implications when some of the world's most powerful people, politicians in particular, in the US, in the UK, maybe even closer to home, are taking such huge liberties with the truth? In some cases, are actively lying in order to gain and retain power?
Yeah, really interesting question. I was at a conference last week with you, Arun, in Johannesburg, and we were talking about reputation. And one of the key takeaways was our behavior is the truth. So it is right that we live in a vastly polarized society, and disinformation is actively created to further divide us. And it's happening at such pace and with such sophistication. Audiences are being radicalized from right under our noses, and we don't really even know it. It is true that political parties across spectrums are taking huge liberties with what the truth is and manipulating that truth to suit certain agendas. But it's not just politicians, right? I mean, disinformation as an agenda is there to disrupt mostly Western democratic processes and values. It is there to create chaos. So as organizations, if our behavior is the truth, then we do have a responsibility to protect our audiences from this cacophony of noise that we now see in the information landscape. So it's really important to not dismiss mis and disinformation as someone else's problem. It is all our problem in this room. So the more we acknowledge it, the more we integrate it proactively into strategies, the more we can inoculate our audiences and organizations. But let's not fool ourselves into thinking this is going away. This is here to stay. It's going to become an even more present threat with the proliferation of AI and the disruption that's going to cause into the world of disinformation. And the truth as we know it is going to be very different in the future to the truth as we know it today. Very soon, it's only face-to-face conversations like this where we will trust authenticity. And we know that AI is absolutely geared to disrupt how we communicate, even with each other. So take it very seriously. Doom and gloom.
Farzana, how can we expect companies to stand for a kind of higher truth when the fabric of information is being undermined so much?
I mean, I love the working with. I'm Gen X. I love working with millennials and Gen Z. I think that they are incredibly, the ones that I meet anyway, are purpose-led. And I feel that they've made a huge change to the corporate world. They're the ones who are driving change. They're the ones who are voting with their wallets. They're the ones who are refusing to work for companies if they feel that there's a gap between what the company says and it does. They're the ones who are calling out their own companies. So I have optimism because I believe the new generations that are coming forward, they are so much more conscious of their own impact and their own power on how to change the world through their ability to to buy into brands or not, to give their time in terms of as employees. So I think they're the great change makers. And I think just in terms of your earlier question that you said about misinformation, I think the power actually to tackle that is here in the room, because in the old days the power balance were with journalists, because they were the gatekeepers of information that went to the public, and now actually the gatekeepers are us, because the majority of content is not coming out via journalists anymore, it's coming out direct through social media, blogs, podcasts. So it's actually our world. So we're the gatekeepers. So we're the new journalists who have that mission mindset to ensure that the communications that we're putting out on behalf of our clients or our companies, that we're making sure that the information is true and fair, and to have the ability to push back on clients or our own bosses if we feel that there's a gap between the reality and what information they're putting out, to prevent greenwashing and diversity washing and so forth. So I think the change makers are actually us.
And that leads quite nicely to my next question, because I'm sure that if you're talking about horizon scanning, I think we're all aware that there is a broader political backlash, particularly in specific countries, but really all across the world. And a trend of rising anti-wokeism, which I think we even heard about earlier today. So companies are trying to stand for something. They are trying to really implement robust ESG policies and practices and take DEI seriously. And at the same time, they're being accused of being too woke. So my final question for you is, how can they navigate that kind of a minefield?
I don't know why it's derogatory, to be woke. I think I would much rather be woke than be asleep. I think with companies, it's just really simple. You have to do what you say and make sure there's no gap, and have that vulnerability to say, I'm working with one company and they're on a sustainability journey. And they were saying, well, we don't want to say anything about sustainability because we're not there yet. And I said, well, tell people that you're on the journey. Your intent is good, that you want to get here. This is how you're going to measure it. This is how you can be transparent and bring in third-party independent people to come and verify your claims. So I think it's up to us, to push back when it comes to information, particularly around sustainability, climate change, diversity, to make sure that, I think there was something yesterday where somebody was showing a video of Tim Cook, and he was speaking to an African-American lady, but yet there was no African-American people in the senior leadership for for the company. A PR person should have called that out. So I think in-house or agency, we're the ones who should call the company out and say, no, that is not right, that's inauthentic. So I think we should be the gatekeepers for authenticity.
Yep, more courage required.
I'll just keep it brief to say it's not just washing, it's also hushing. I think the wokeism and culture wars are making companies not want to communicate their good policies for the fear of backlash. But our behavior is the truth. And the reputation of ourselves, our companies, our organizations, our agencies are only going to be protected if we walk the talk. Always get it wrong, but you know what I mean. Keep true, be authentic.
I think we do know what you mean. So thank you both very much. Kiruba, back to you.
Thank you. We could take one question from the audience if you have.
Excellent.
Okay, so let's give it to Girish.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Girish. I'm from On Purpose. So my question for both of you is, how do you get clients to buy what you're selling when the actual design of the program is going to be based on insights from research that hasn't yet been done?
Isn't that a great question? So it starts with outcomes. So even though the insights may not have been designed, you will probably have a catalog of outcomes from previous work. that you can demonstrate as proof of concept, proof of, methodology. But also what we do in getting client buy-in to this type of methodology, which is different and unique, is articulate the problem that they have through the lens of behavioral science. Get them to think differently about the problem. Get them to understand the risks that they may not have considered as risks. Outline the methodology and the way it would be manifested if we were to come into a brief. So I think it's about bringing them on, as you say, on that journey, inspiring a sense of curiosity, a sense of excitement to a different approach, but then backing that up with hard numbers and demonstrating that this isn't just all talk, that you've done it before, it works, and this is how it's going to be done.
I would say fear. Fear is a very powerful human motivator. Saying to clients, do you think you're going to be top dog for the rest of, eternity? Or, what's happening with the competition? Or even more scary, what's happening out of the industry with the disruptors that will come into the industry? Think Airbnb, think Monzo and other brands. So I think fear is a very powerful motivation with clients where they want to know and be prepared. And I think, with our sort of evolutionary biology, we are much more attuned to threats than we are with opportunities. So horizon scanning comes natural, but you want to also push it towards a positive and let them understand there's opportunities to be had as well, not just protecting yourself.
The behavioral science term is loss aversion. We prefer losses to gains.
Yeah, scare them into it.
On that note, thank you so much. One more question?
Yep.
Go for it.
Thank you so much. Great insights, Shayoni, and a great presentation, Farzana. So we really enjoyed the two sessions. My question to Shayoni is that how do you take care of the ethical considerations around your campaigns, so as to not come across as someone reflecting or a campaign reflecting Bernays' engineering of consent, which we theoretically understand as manufacturing of consent, because you're trying to maneuver around engineering of consent within a population around a campaign, which might be good for the good of the public, but there is a kind of that fear of being seen as someone who's trying to, I really don't want to use the manipulation,
Puppeteer.
but yeah, I hope you understand.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And it's, that's why I'm very clear to talk about the way we approach behavioral sciences through education and persuasion, not manipulation. So science is a science, right? It can be used for good, it can be used for bad. You can use it to create a life-saving vaccine, or you can use it to create a bomb and nuke countries. So it is in the hands of the people who deploy it. When it comes to ethics, I think that's a really very good question, and it's something that we constantly think of within the practice. Behavioral science, in its truest form, is not designed to take away choice. It's designed to make people reflect on choice in the best possible way. So it's not taking away agency. It's presenting information in the way that we as human beings will best see it, engage it, interpret it correctly. And then you hope by doing it that way and making it persuasive, that individuals will make the best decisions for themselves. Now that may be that they don't take the vaccine in the case of COVID, and that's fine. That's their choice. But what my job, my team's job is to make sure is that they see the message, they understand what I'm trying to tell them, and then they make a more considered decision that is right for them. So it's not propaganda, it can be propaganda, it can be manipulative, it can puppeteer. That is not the approach that we have at Lynn or the wider behavioral science world has either.
Yeah, excellent question.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up to Farzana, Shayoni, and Arun. Thank you, Arun. Appreciate it.